The Battle of Gettysburg and the Battle of Antietam are two of the most important battles in American history, and yet there is one major difference between them that may surprise you. Hey there, and welcome to this channel, where we bring you new videos every day exploring the amazing history of our nation. Today, we're looking at the impact of two of the bloodiest battles ever fought on American soil, the Battle of Gettysburg and the Battle of Antietam. But before we get started, I want to ask you to join me on another channel, where each week we explore a different First Amendment issue through the lens of a movie. I'll provide the movie and you bring your brilliant insight. We'd love to have you there. So what was the major difference between these two battles? Well, it's this. The Battle of Gettysburg is considered by most historians to be the turning point of the Civil War. The Battle of Antietam, while incredibly bloody, is not considered to have any real impact on the overall outcome of the war. And yet, when you look at the numbers, Antietam is far bloodier than Gettysburg. Over 3 days of fighting in July 1863, approximately 51,000 soldiers were killed or wounded at Gettysburg. This would be devastating by any standard. And indeed, President Abraham Lincoln would go on to call it a very costly victory. But the numbers from Antietam are truly staggering. On September 17, 1862, in just a single day of fighting in western Maryland, more than 23,000 men were killed or wounded. How can it be that the battle with fewer total casualties is considered the turning point of the war, while the much bloodier battle is not? To answer this question, let's first talk about what happened at each of these battles. In September of 1862, Confederate General Robert E. Lee was pushing north into Maryland. His goal was not to invade the northern states, but rather to force the Union to fight him on his own ground, an area where he believed his troops would have a decisive advantage over the Union Army. For their part, the Union generals wanted to stop Lee's advance. They also hoped that if they could beat back the Confederates, they might even be able to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. The two armies met at the Battle of Antietam, also known as the Battle of Sharpsburg. It was here that Confederate troops held the Union Army at bay, killing or wounding more than twice as many Union soldiers as they lost themselves. While Lee did not win a victory at Antietam, he did accomplish his objective. He had forced the Union Army to fight him on the battlefield rather than retreat behind the safety of the Mason-Dixon line. And so, Lee returned south to Virginia, believing that the war would now be a draw. The North would not risk sending their large army back into Maryland for fear of another defeat. And so, the South would be free to fight its own war in its own territory. But Lee had miscalculated. As it turned out, President Abraham Lincoln saw the carnage at Antietam as an opportunity. Just days after the battle, he announced that he would use the battle as an occasion to issue the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that all slaves in Confederate-held territory would be freed. Lincoln had previously been reluctant to abolish slavery, as it was not really an issue that greatly concerned him personally. He also feared that such a move would alienate the border states who still permitted slavery, but who were firmly in the Union. The carnage at Antietam, however, provided Lincoln with the opportunity he needed to finally embrace abolition. And this proved to be a masterstroke, as it turned the war into a war about slavery, thereby galvanizing the northern states, and providing Lincoln with a strong moral argument for winning foreign support for the Union cause. So yes, although the Battle of Antietam was a tactical defeat for the Union, it actually ended up helping them out in the long run. So why is it that this battle is not considered a turning point in the war? Well, simply because the Confederacy would go on to win far more battles than they would lose for the remainder of the war. In fact, after the Battle of Gettysburg, the Confederacy would only win 5 more major battles against the Union, all of which were in the Western theater, far from the heart of the Confederacy. The war would effectively come down to a contest between General Ulysses Grant in the east and General William T. Sherman in the west. The Union would win virtually every major engagement from this point forward. And it would be these victories, especially those won by Sherman, that would lead to the ultimate collapse of the Confederacy. Gettysburg began like Antietam, with the two armies looking for a fight. This time, however, it was the Union Army under General George Meade that was on the offensive. Meade pursued Lee's army northward, hoping to deliver a decisive blow that would finally put an end to the war. The two armies collided on July 1st, 1863, and fighting quickly became intense. A Union assault on Confederate positions on Little Round Top failed, and the Confederates made some small gains during the evening. By the next day, however, the Union forces had pushed the Confederates back to a small area on the high ground known as Cemetery Ridge. The fighting was intense, with one Union general later calling it the most terrific artillery bombardment ever witnessed. But by the end of the second day, the Union troops had taken up positions around Cemetery Ridge, forming what would become known as the fishhook. At this point, General Lee realized that he did not have the strength to dislodge the Union troops from their position, and so he made the decision to make one final attempt to take the high ground on the third day. This attack has become known as Pickett's Charge. It was a massive assault by 15,000 Confederate soldiers across an open field nearly a mile and a half wide. The attackers would have to traverse this open field while avoiding the deadly artillery fire of more than 100 Union cannons. As it turned out, the attack was a disaster. Not only did the Union artillery decimate the attacking force, but the surviving Confederates were easily mowed down by Union riflemen. Of the 15,000 that went out to attack, 5,000 were killed or wounded. And this marked the end of the battle and the effective end of the Confederate threat to the north. There are a few reasons why Gettysburg is considered the turning point of the war. The first reason is that the Confederate Army never again came north of the Mason-Dixon line. Although the Confederacy would go on to win several more battles, none of them would come anywhere close to turning the tide of the war in their favor. The second reason is that the Union public, which had been growing weary of the war, was energized by the victory. The third reason is that the South suffered a manpower shortage from which it would never recover. After losing 28% of their total strength at Gettysburg, the Confederacy would never again be able to raise an army as large as the one that fought for the Union. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the victory at Gettysburg gave the Union Army under General Grant the confidence and experience necessary to win the war. In fact, some historians argue that Lincoln purposely delayed promoting Grant to Major General so that he could gain valuable combat experience, and there's evidence to support this. Regardless, Grant would go on to win virtually every major engagement for the remainder of the war. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like it, and hey, thanks for watching.